Good day, colleagues. Our paper is titled "The Pandemic is Our Portal, Reimagining Teaching and Learning in the Time of COVID-19. I am Dr. Mlamuli Hlatshwayo. With me is my colleague, Dr. Samu Khumalo, as well as representing our colleague, Dr. Nomkhosi Nzimande. Dr. Nzimande will be facilitating the Q&A for us, so you will be meeting her shortly as well. Colleague, before we even get started with our paper, we think it's absolutely important that we reflect quite seriously on the challenges that we're experiencing. As I was mentioning, before we speak about reflecting on our teaching and learning experience, we think it's absolutely important that we reflect on the challenges that continue to grapple the South African higher education sector, as we note. We know about the Fees Must Fall and the Roads Must Fall student protests that occurred in 2015, 2016. Those were mainly the struggles around access, both formal physical registration, as well as epistemic in the knowledge sense of accessing the curriculum. We know about the struggles for transforming, reforming, Africanizing the curriculum, and now outdated colonizing the students, and progressive academics have been looking at it. We are living in the COVID moment, colleagues, as well. Some of us have been sick, have been affected by this. Some of us lost our family members, lost friends, colleagues, and others. So we cannot underemphasize this moment that we are facing and the brutality it has been on our lives. We are currently dealing with online teaching, online virtual digital teaching and learning practice, and we think it's absolutely important that we reflect on that. More recently, there are issues raised and being flagged in the literature around technological inequality. We know about the structural and the racialized inequality within the South African society, no doubt as a result of slavery, colonization, as well as apartheid. Technology COVID exacerbated some of those inequities. As a result, there's an emerging increase of student dropout rates that we are seeing in other universities as well. And more recently, colleagues, there are issues around the depression, mental fatigue, digital fatigue that we are finding out, not only from other academics themselves, but also students who are speaking about this digital fatigue. The days never ending, the meetings and the assignments and the submissions, they start quite early. For some of us, it even ends at 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. or even quite later. So there are those mental health issues that we have to contend with. I think it's been interesting that another debate that has been rising is asking the important question: to what extent can online teaching and learning enable and facilitate access to the curriculum? In other words, how could this digitized curriculum that we are currently facing with, is it necessarily useful in enabling and facilitating access to the curriculum and making sure that students understand as well? So what is our intervention in this paper? In this paper, colleagues, we're attempting to offer some theoretical as well as philosophical empirical reflections on our experiences as teacher educators in a South African university. Through a series of reflexivity and dialogic conversations with one another, we as colleagues in curriculum studies grouped together to theorize and reflect on our own teaching and learning experiences during this moment. We rely on and draw on the Indian novelist as well as cultural political activist Arundhati Roy and his concept of the pandemic as a portal to A, reflect on our teaching and learning practice, but B, and I suppose more importantly as well, we begin to put our heads a little bit out there and propose a more humanist and socially just pedagogies that we propose in our work. Colleagues, our conceptual framings that we draw in this article are taken from Arundhati Roy, as I've mentioned, in a powerful article in the Financial Times titled "The Pandemic is Our Portal." Roy reflects and argues on the devastating effects that the COVID pandemic has had mainly on the poor and the dispossessed subalterns on the ground. And so for Roy, she traces the Hinduification of the Indian state and how the port of the pandemic has been quite brutal in affecting those who have so less, and how it has been affecting and exacerbating some of those inequalities on the ground. So Roy sees the pandemic as a portal, as a space for us to almost break with the past and to begin to rethink and reimagine what the future would look like. So Roy calls on us to see the pandemic, not only to reflect on what it is at the moment, but also beginning to see the pandemic as an epistemic opportunity. No, we are not suggesting that the pandemic has been very good for us and the advantages to the pandemic. That's not what we are saying. What we are saying, and we are building on Roy's argument, is that the pandemic is also an opportunity to reflect on ourselves and our teaching and learning experience so that we can imagine what the alternative future could look like. Colleagues, I now hand over to my colleague, Dr. Samu Khumalo, to continue on the findings as well as offering some conclusions for us as well. Over to you, Doc.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hlatshwayo, and greetings to colleagues. Colleagues, as we are reflecting about pandemic as a portal, so in our reflection, we noted that it was apparent during the COVID-19 that institutions worldwide of higher learning could not operate under the business as usual model. So there was a shift from face-to-face to remote learning. So in our reflection, we're going to zoom into only one theme, which is the shift to pandemic teaching. So in this theme, we noted 3 different types of changes that occurred in higher learning during the pandemic. Firstly, I would like to talk about the institutional directed change, which are the changes that took place within the institution. For an example, the processes that we used to do manually, so they had to change to be online. The university also increased the provision of online resources, and also they tried their best to capacitate the staff during this pandemic period in a very short space of time. But the university also attempted not to leave any student behind. But also at the same time, there were changes that were academic related. For an example, during the shift to the online learning, so we had to make changes. For an example, changing our teaching template, module template, adapting the planned curriculum to suit the online environment, also changing the mode of teaching and also the way that we are assessing. So while we were doing that, but we were also faced with the issues of balancing work as well as personal and family issues, which actually increased our workload because we had to look after our families, look after ourselves, but at the same time care for students and revising all the manual processes and the practices to online. So it wasn't only just the academics and the institution that had to face with the changes. The students as well had to adapt to the new normal of learning, new normal of being assessed, and while actually experiencing the limited resources, the limited network, and as well as the lack of support or adequate support. So while the students were experiencing these changes, colleagues, students in our institution and in our school in particular, they come from quintile 1 to quintile 3. So these are the students that come from disadvantaged background with poor infrastructure as well as poor resources. So Banya and Banerjee, they state that the pandemic teaching was challenged by the technical difficulties such as the network problem, the data bundles, communicating with students, and poor infrastructure. So our students were actually highly challenged by these limitations during the shift to the pandemic teaching. So while the shift, colleagues, in the mode of delivery from the contact session to online learning by universities during the pandemic teaching has been seen actually as a solution to save the academic year, it actually restricted the inclusion of students who come from the diverse background. And because the students from disadvantaged background have another layer of needs, that are related to the resources, infrastructure, as well as accessibility, because of the communities where they come from, and particularly the rural communities. So while we spoke about the experiences that the institution, academics, the students were faced with, but we would like to flag how education sector benefited from the pandemic teaching. So in our observation, we saw that it actually created opportunity for us to gain new online skills. It increased our digital proficiency, and also it made us to be aware that there are alternative, which is pedagogical practices that we can do. It actually opened the doors for the digital culture for both staff as well as students, because we found ourselves having the Zoom meetings and using the multiple forms of communicating with the students, such as the WhatsApp, such as the Moodle, etc. But we have also seen that it has increased the collaboration between various stakeholders in education, because we had some webinars, international webinars, that we were able to attend, and which are things that were actually a challenge when we were on face-to-face. So colleagues, in concluding, as we draw from Roy's concept of the pandemic as a portal, we think that it is critical to actually reflect on our pandemic teaching and learning practices, as well as our experiences, but also to reimagine what socially just and democratic teaching will look like in the future. And also, higher education institutions also need to better construct and introduce the workshops, spaces, and forums dedicated to critical dialogue and conversation on online teaching and learning experiences. Colleagues, thank you.